Welcome to Green Fashion Dialogues, the official podcast of the STARS project. I'm Simona Vettore, junior expert in circular economy and your host. STARS is part of the Erasmus Plus program, co-financed by the European Union. In this episode, we welcome back Lily Hewes, a designer, researcher and activist. Born in England and now based in Milan, Lily shares her unique perspective on sustainable fashion. We discuss her vision of clothing as armour, not just garments, but empowering tools for self-expression and protection. She also delves into her Modular fashion project, Season 0, highlighting the importance of reducing environmental impact through life cycle thinking and creating pieces people can truly connect with. Lily's passion for activism shines through as she explains how everyone can make a difference by staying informed, building local networks, and, as a designer, focusing on accessible, local resources within the value chain. This is an inspiring conversation about innovation, community, and the transformative power of sustainable design. Let's start. Hi Lily, it's a pleasure to have you here. Welcome. How are you today?
Hi, Simona. Hi, nice to see you again. I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Oh, good. Thank you. I'm very happy to have you here and discuss few topics related to sustainable fashion together. You are so young and so talented, so I can't wait to know a little bit more about yourself. So first of all, can I ask you to introduce yourself and share your journey into sustainable fashion?
Yes, of course. First of all, thank you for for that. That's very sweet. My my journey from sustainable fashion started around 10 years ago, even maybe 11 years ago. First of all, just to say that now I am a sustainable co-designer and research fellow for Politecnico di Milano, but 11 years ago, when I started this journey, I was simply a student who was looking to break into the fashion industry and not particularly into the sustainable one. So I think what happened was, after many, I suppose, sustainable influences from my university in England, when it came to experiences, internships, they were all circled with nature, let's say. So nature was always a big element and centric vision in every project that I did, because I was based in the northeast of England, in the countryside. So when I left university, I would go home, I would go take the dogs out for a walk, and I loved the nature that I had around me. So I think, thanks to my upbringing and my childhood, I always had a lot of respect for nature. And then when I started actually studying fashion, I realized what a horrific impact my dream job potentially could have. So that's when I started to investigate more sustainable pathways in fashion industry, which led me to activism. So probably that, a bit of the childhood. And the university I went to in England was in the countryside. So I wasn't based in a city starting off. And I think that really influenced the surroundings.
So contact with nature.
Totally, yeah.
Wow, beautiful. So you launched your own project called Season 0, which has a very intriguing name, and I love you for you to tell us more about it. But what stands out in its description is the idea of creating collections, uniforms, and clothes for apocalyptic survival. What do you mean? Can you explain this concept and how it was born?
Yeah, so this was a very exciting project led by myself and supported by Erminia Dietra, who was my professor at University of Politecnico di Milano. And together we had a mission to finish the thesis, of course, and work on a sustainable project that was celebrating hyperlocalism in the territory of Lombardy, specifically Milan. And it started off with the fact that I was extremely influenced by modular fashion and the idea of clothing being like Lego. I really wanted to be able to take apart each aspect, like armor. For me, I see clothes as like armor that you should use to protect yourself for, okay, the day that you have a head, you want to look smart, you want to look amazing, you want to have sort of your battle wear ready. And also you want to be able to interchange and customize what you wear. So season zero is an optimistic variable in my eyes. It's like starting from zero and eliminating the 200 seasons a year that perhaps Zara would sort of, yeah, having their market. They every year have so many different seasons that come out on a bi-weekly basis. It was just almost offensive to me. And I wanted to go completely the opposite and have zero seasons. Like, what would it look like if the year didn't have seasons and it was just one that was interchangeable and had a more slower consumption pattern? So that's the idea of season zero. It was to enhance social design in fashion and try to look at not only the three pillars of sustainability, which are, of course, environmental, economical, and political, but I always wondered where the social and the cultural aspects came in. And so this collection, this capsule, this collective was to celebrate the social and cultural side of fashion, trying to democratize the fashion supply chain. But at the same time, hey, you can't explain that to the public every time, like, oh, what is this brand? You can't spend 5 minutes explaining how to democratize the fashion supply chain. So having it as a tangible, small capsule collection that's tailor-made for you was a way to translate the idea to the public or to the client or the consumer on a different scale. Because that's, I think, at the end of the day, what brands should do. They should educate. I think it's offensive if you put so much time, money, and energy into a project and you're not actually letting the consumers in to your idea. I believe that you should just break down that wall between the consumer and the company. I just think that it shouldn't exist. So it came from a university perspective, but it also came from a personal perspective. And so on top of that, I have always been inspired by more utilitarian designers like Massimo Osti. I love Stone Island. I actually worked for Stone Island for a year, and they heavily influenced my design philosophy in terms of building gear and uniforms to last.
This is very interesting. And also, when you mentioned the democratization of fashion, anyone think that fast fashion is a way to democratize fashion because we can have clothes at a cheaper price and a lot of clothes every day available, every day changing. So this is groundbreaking, is totally different, the opposite, let's say, of democratizing fashion as we considered looking through the eyes of fast fashion.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? There's some good things that we can take from fast fashion. The way they scale, the way they are able to scale and communicate to the mass is paramount. I mean, I hope to learn that side of it. Being able to scale sustainable fashion on that level is my goal, is everyone's goal that works in this industry, I think. So you have to really, there's good and bad to every story. I think people really abuse the word sustainability now. And so it's become insignificant to the public and probably almost an annoyance. So I think now the best way to approach it is to not blame brands or not blame the past, but try to influence the future through incremental changes. And I think we can use the pandemic, for example, as a way to help us through that, because during the pandemic, people became more grounded, more down to earth. They were baking bread, they were doing things at home, they were crafting, they were going crazy about DIY, and I think that naturally there is some craving that the public have to have control over what they wear, and it's not decided by a conglomerate, and it's not driven by bi-weekly collections that they walk past every day and they think, oh god, I need another like black sparkly jumper, and it's like, okay, you already have 5 at home, so why is there's this pressure? So I think democratizing the supply chain is necessary, but it's not something that the public need to know specifically. But I think that it can be translated through clothing. I mean, that's the whole point of fashion, right? It's actually creating a statement. And let's try to create a statement that has a more eco-centric approach without the public even knowing about it. I mean, as a consumer, if I buy a product, it's not necessarily because I know everything about the brand or everything about the impact, but it's becoming fashionable to understand where your product comes from. And I think little by little, there's just this natural change that we will fall into.
And we really hope so. Another key element you mentioned related to your project is the reference to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. How do you incorporate performance-based fabrics and the ESG into your work?
Okay, that's a great question. So part of Season Zero's idea of a swift transition into a carbon neutral 2050, let's say, is to try and integrate SDGs into every element or aspect of the supply chain when you can, of course. So for 2 things, the performance-based fabrics, of course, there are certain SDGs or policies that you can follow that will indicate what fabrics would be better for you to use, of course. So using LCA platforms to evaluate the properties of the fabric is very necessary, and every designer, maybe in their job role, don't have a direct link to that, but it's something that perhaps the sustainability department would take care of, making sure that all the material properties are meeting the requirements. So of course, I think the main thing to take away from that is when you are designing, you should at least try to understand what is happening in the political environment to enhance your design goals. So, for example, the United Nations and all of the SDGs that were set it's not like you have to tick a box and try to use all of them. But if you can work to one specifically throughout your design phase, then that's sort of an amazing goal that you can apply to your work. For example, with Season Zero, there was a massive change on the supply chain flow. So it tried to investigate the idea of reconstructing education or self-learning through building clothes. And that, in a way, picked up upon the DPP, like the Digital Product Passport, and textile sorting for appropriate use or collaborative consumption with local material collection hubs. And so those are integrating SDGs without you knowing it that comply with local regulations. So whatever business model you have, whatever brand you have, whatever garment that you want to design, you can literally look up online in your local area what sort of rules and regulations and policies are in place to make a more clean product. But on top of that, you can also source locally. So I have this rule, it's like under 10 kilometers. If you're designing in an area and you're not thinking about the scale, have a look at your local material hubs, have a look at your local textiles manufacturers, because pretty sure if they have some waste and you go and ask like, hey, what are you doing with all of your extra linings? You can make something out of them. So try to source locally and within your territory, I think is a really important thing when it comes to fabric decisions. If you're working with performance-based fabrics, again, difficult, because in apparel you can use sort of more readily available fabrics. Recycled organic fabrics is fine, but when we're talking about performance-based fabrics, usually you're thinking about something perhaps more stretchy with more three-dimensional qualities. Perhaps there is some plastic involved. So then the more performance-based the fabric is, the more rules you have to follow, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And the supply chain plays a pivotal role in the quality and also the sustainability of clothes. We are used to very long and complex supply chain that go around the world. But you say that we can go locally. So can you explain a little bit more the role of supply chain in a more conscious and sustainable uh, fashion production?
Yeah, sure. I suppose if we're going to talk about supply chains, we have to talk about the value chain, which is the concept which helps brands identify opportunities for creating efficiency or reducing cost or enhancing the value of the product. The value chain perspective extends beyond the boundaries of a single brand or company, because it includes suppliers, it includes designers, product developers, intermediaries, customers even, and consumers on each step of the process. And if you look at it like a giant circle, if you look at it really holistically, the framework of a supply chain, in my eyes, like biomimicry, should replicate nature. There should be a circular, not a linear approach. So I think that if you can try to close the loop on your supply chain, whether that is a very small business or NGO, or you're looking at a larger scale for more luxury companies, especially when it comes to Milan, of course. If we're going to talk about Lombardy, you have extremely huge scales of luxury fashion companies that have been working in a linear way for hundreds of years, and you have to try to implement a more circular approach to get them to pivot in that direction, which, of course, depending on the fabric that they use, that can help you understand if you can drive it locally or not. Unfortunately, season zero, and this is, it's good to reflect on the negatives of it sometimes, is it actually scalable, and can this value chain be applied on a bigger scale? Yes, probably, but it could take a very, very long time. I mean, I always planned to have the time frame of 2030, but I'm well aware, as many other fashion designers or activists are, that if we're looking at 2050 carbon neutral, there is a many, many steps and a long path ahead of incremental changes to make linear value chains more circular. But we're being optimistically anxious.
Yeah, well, we are all trying our best. You also mentioned the LCA, that is the life cycle assessment, isn't it?
Yes, LCA life cycle assessments.
That is used to calculate, even if it's more or less an estimation, the impact of a product or a raw material in the environment. So it's a very complex tool that engineering are using to calculate the impact under an aspect on not only of CO2 emission, so carbon emission, but also related to the impact on water, on the soil, and anything related to the environment. Was just a small specification that I had to do because not everyone knows what an LCA is, and it's a very complex concept. But we talked about circularity. That is another word that we are listening a lot recently, and it's also complex to concretely put in action. So my question is, you worked also with circularity with other startups and other firms, other companies. Can you give us some examples of the projects you worked on?
Yeah, of course. So LCA, and otherwise known as like a life cycle thinking approach, has been driven, yes, probably more so by engineers than designers. But I think that it's important to remember that up to, I think it was 80% of the environmental impact can be reduced in the design phase of designing a product, of course. So yeah, I was heavily influenced by an inspirational professor. His name is Carlo Vezzali, and he has been a professor at Politecnico di Milano. I'm not sure since when, but he has been working in the environment of sustainable product systems for many years and has published many books relevant to this. And he calls it the life cycle thinking approach. So, adopting a functional approach to design with an environmental perspective is his main goal. And I think that through his lab, which is called Lens Lab at Polyme, it is an incredible international research laboratory filled with incredible minds. Carlo Vezzali himself and PhD students that I had the pleasure of working with. And I worked alongside them for around 7 or 8 months, I think. Actually, it was an educational internship, part of my master's. And I wanted to work in a more tangible and engineering, taking that kind of perspective rather than working in the design department of a brand, because I thought that I could learn more about how to avoid, taking the wrong decisions when it comes to designing a product. So some of the projects that they were working on, I can't go into too much detail, of course, but their main goal and our main goal was to create tools to apply to brands, whether they were luxury fashion brands, whether they were kitchen and appliance brands. No matter the company, their goal was to create a source where any company can create their own circular business model through the tools that were created within the lab. So, and this is an open resource laboratory. And I think that that is a very positive way to approach. I mean, very intricate. They're working around the clock, and I'm sure they will be for many years, to try and understand how they can create different circular tools to impact businesses. And that approach of taking the science of a LCA, which can be quite complicated to anyone who's starting out in the designing industry. You know, they want to be a designer, and then someone says, hey, you also have to learn how to be an engineer and how to be an activist and how to be a stakeholder. And it's, I suppose, there are ways now that LCAs have become more simple to use for the everyday user. And I really find these NGOs and businesses amazing that are spending their time on trying to democratize the tools so that anyone and everyone can use them to make a more cleaner and environmentally clean product. But here's the thing, this is the interesting part. LCAs really do evaluate the environmental, the economic, and sometimes social aspect, depending on which tool that you use. There are many. But they don't absolutely evaluate the social, cultural, and local aspect of this, which is what, you know, the human part comes in. This is the dichotomy between ecocentric and technocentric design philosophies, where, you know, there is the empathetic, the emotional side of a designer, of a mind, of a community, that a machine, a tool, a digital appliance cannot evaluate or cannot take into consideration. So we can talk about LCAs and applying a more environmental and political correct perspective, but personally, all of that I think is useless without the human perspective and being empathetic towards your local community. When you're thinking about designing a product, what do you have in a local area that can be used for the benefit of your territory?
Yeah, absolutely. This social aspect is very important. Would you like to explain a little bit more how fashion can impact also the social side?
Yeah. Societally, I think that the rise of co-creation has never been as high as it is right now. I think if we were to look at things on a time frame from 2020, you know, 30 to 2050, I really think that behaviorally our consumption patterns will change heavily, and they already are. And there is this call for the makeshift mentality of, you know, recycling what you have, upcycling what you have. You have something from your parents, you try to use it. If they don't, if that product is not useful to you, then, you know, you give it to someone else. And this passing down of the garment as well, I think, can really be romanticized. I think it's something that should be celebrated. I know that it's something that perhaps, I know as I was growing up, if someone was like, oh, you know, you're wearing hand-me-downs, it was like, it had a bad connotation. Whereas the beautiful thing that I notice in Italy is actually it has a very good connotation. And the more you look after your garment and your heirlooms, if they are clothes to say, it's actually something very, very instinctual, and it should be the norm, I think. So socially, I think if you can get people involved emotionally with their garments, whether that is through heritage or whether that is from getting them involved in the repairs of the garment or letting them have some aspect of control over their fashion decisions or wardrobe, I think that's the right way to collaborate with the consumer. So brands and the consumer should be shaking hands. You know, they shouldn't be begging to try and get into the brand, or the brand shouldn't be trying to push their products on the consumers. There should be some kind of harmony between them both. So the social and cultural side, there are many avenues still to to evaluate and to study. There are many amazing professors at Polytechnical University that are really working on the emotional and impactful side of retail and social design to impact the consumers in a more emotional way. And it's quite interesting of how we can use retail as the experience, as an exhibition, let's say, for people to start to understand how to consume better. So yeah, the social and cultural side of it is really an important way to approach the LCA as well, not forgetting that side.
But to keep a garment for a long time and feeling an emotional attachment to it, we need that garments must be like made from a textile that has a long lifespan. So the decision that designer has to take when choosing the raw materials is fundamental. So what strategies can a designer make to do the right decision?
So when it comes to fabric, making the right decision, well, I suppose you have to change your perspective. There's no right decision, I suppose, now with the amount of sustainable fabrics that are available online that you can buy very easily and be imported from anywhere with a high carbon footprint. Not ideal, but it is amazing of how many experimental and vegan levers that we now have on the market. And that is an incredible thing that I would like to continue to investigate, even throughout my own brand, for example. However, if you can look for local hubs, for example, material hubs, there is an amazing one that I'll just drop the name here so people can go and visit it, called Meta Space, META Space, in Milan, based in Bovisa. And basically they take a load of refurbished or recycled materials that maybe came from fashion shows or events in the local area, and they have categorized all of the waste into wood, glass, materials that can be used for both fabric and products, maybe more on the furnishing side. But I think when it comes to making a right decision about fabric is, why don't you try to use something that you haven't used before that would usually be deemed as not fit for a garment? So maybe you could try using towels or existing clothes, or if you go to a material hub, usually they have a lot of leftover sofa or car fabric or very, very strange fabrics that you wouldn't really expect. And Season Zero's first capsule collection was made out of leftover material, but it was like almost a plastified cotton twill that was half bleached one color, and then it was a complete mess what I found. And I actually took it out of like a bowl of mud basically, and once that was sort of cleaned off, washed down, and sort of made constructible for the product, I was like, well, why not? So try to use things that you wouldn't expect is a nice way to experiment with fabrics, and also use something that you haven't bought from a fabric store or hasn't been imported. So use what you have, use what is local. And for example, in Milan, we're blessed with the amount of incredible new and innovative materials. For example, marmour, Filippari, a couple of amazing designers that this was born from a thesis in Polytechnical. They turned the resin from marble. Like marble in the northern territory of Italy is pretty, you find marble everywhere in this area. So they looked at what there is locally, waste-wise. They took a byproduct from marble and created a new resin which can be applied to a fabric to make it impermeable or waterproof. And so, for example, that is an amazing approach to applying nanotechnology or bringing nanotechnology in, using the science and the labs and the facilities that we have in the local area to take waste and make something new out of it. So, for example, if you're based in London or you're based in another city in Europe, have a look at what's around, what companies are using, what byproduct there is, what waste there is, and see what can be done with the product. So let the fabric choose the product rather than you choose the fabric for the product. The fabric should drive the product's meaning, I would say. So just changing the perspective.
Yeah, totally. And another interesting aspect that you mentioned is the modular fashion. That is somehow an innovation, but also as a very, it is used a long time ago when, like, at the beginning of the century, people will just change a part of their clothes because they were broken or um, too used. So, what do you do you want to share a little bit more about the concept of modular fashion and how it can change our way to consume clothes?
Yeah, sure. I mean, of course, from the beginning of time, modularity has been part of our culture, as you said, specifically when it comes to the military, and when you come to the history behind modularity. It was for convenience, it was for efficiency, it was for protection, and I think that's a really beautiful notion that got left behind in this new era of fashion. And I'm really like pioneering for it to come back, because if you can take a modular aspect to your clothes to repair a sleeve or the most worn parts of your garment, the longer your product can last, of course. So yeah, modularity is pioneered now by an amazing amount of designers. One in specific is J. Kai. So the idea of modularity and creating apparel that is repairable and interchangeable and self-built has been done before. I mean, it's been done many times, specifically driven by a designer called J. Kai at the moment, who is building a new system that doesn't end just in the pattern cutting phase of production, but extends to the end use of said garment, creating a synergy between the designer and the consumer, giving them the choice to sort of build their own wardrobe. And I love this aspect. And if you go on his website, which is like www./j/e/kai.com, you will see the website is laid out like, I don't know, it's like someone took all of the box of Lego and tipped it on the floor, and you can literally just pick and mix. It's like you go into an M&M's world and you can pick and mix any sweet that you want. And I think that is amazing. Like, I think that is pioneering, because now when you go into a shop, everything is selected, everything is planned for you to go around the shop in a certain way to make you feel like you need to buy different garments for different parts of the year. Whereas actually the way J. Kai and also many other designers like Yumiya Yakazzato and Flavia della Roccia, they are building a way of buying clothes that's completely different to what we've seen before. And I think that this idea of decentralized garmentry is being modular. So taking aspects of the garment that you don't need. Okay, you buy a standard blazer, but what if you want to go to an event and you need to have another layer of elegance? What does that layer look like? And can you just buy a layer, or do you have to buy a whole new suit? How can you change your existing garments to look more elegant if needed. So yeah, the idea of modularity is very exciting. And as it is in every aspect, when you go to a shop and you have a choice to build what you want, whether that's a teddy bear, like Build-A-Bear, or whether it's pick and mix, like the sweet shop, where you can have the design decision put in your hands, I think that's the most powerful way of consuming something.
And I think it's also strictly related to customization. That is something that we are looking for again and again in each product that we want to buy.
Yeah, customization is absolutely key to find the fifth non-existing pillar of sustainability, which is the cultural aspect. If you can pick and choose what you want, like from the market as you do, or as strategically as when you go to the supermarket. But what's behind that is options and our options. Now, if you create options, then you're creating a lot more than what you actually need. So now the investigation starts of how can we make optional sustainable? How can we make the customization of something sustainable without it becoming too much of a mass scale?
So modular fashion will be like going a supermarket and having all the ingredients that you can choose to create your own recipe, isn't it?
Exactly, but we are controlling the ingredients.
Okay.
The point is that you can and you should have the option to customize, of course, but how much you are able to customize should be monitored, and that's where policies come in. That's when activists come in. That's when the more eco-centric side of the brand comes in and tries to create limited options, or else it's just capitalism.
Again.
You know. So yeah, it's a way of having control over your product, but also having control over the choice of the consumer in a very playful way that's not going to scare off the consumer or your supply chain. You know, you have to also have elements of your suppliers, your stakeholders, they need to be on board. That's why the linear chain needs to become more circular, because every aspect of the supply chain needs to work synergistically together to achieve this approach, which is why it's so important to have a multifaceted approach when it comes to fashion design now.
Yeah. So moving to your role as a fashion revolution ambassador, first question is what inspired you to become an ambassador for Fashion Revolution?
Well, actually, my professor Francesco Cara, he was actually pioneering in trying to digitalize the environment of Nokia. I think this was in the 90s. So he was sort of a very key designer in the digitalization of the phone. And so his approach to digitalization was, okay, if we're going to digitalize something, what are the sustainable aspects of going digital? You know, how can we be sustainable online, which is another huge area to go down. And so his influence of looking into charities, NGOs, he had to try to build a balance between what the environment wanted and what the company wanted. And so through his teachings, he had a philosophy which was to involve and engage local stakeholders in everything that you do, to gain opinions, to have insight, to look at trends. And he made it very clear that anyone in the room, being an architect, a designer, an engineer, needed to have some sort of activism role, or should have some kind of activist role, to understand what the local society needed and what they were thinking about the products and the local businesses that they were using. So it started off from him being influenced by activism and his own activism that he'd done in his lifetime throughout his extensive career. And I realized that, okay, if I have free time, I want to be involved in something revolutionary. And Fashion Revolution is revolutionary. It is an incredible NGO that is pioneering many fronts in sustainable fashion and is giving a voice to the supply chain workers that have no voice in the fashion environment. So, you know, it's a very inspiring NGO that leads you to intervene in policy, which at the end of the day cannot be ignored when it comes to being a designer. You should also check what policies are happening in your local environment, but also if you can support a campaign on a global scale for a more positive change, I mean, why not?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And can you share more about the Good Clothes Fair Pay campaign and your role in advocating for EU legislation?
Yeah, so with Good Clothes Fair Pay, an amazing campaign that is trying to get people to sign petitions for fair payments across fashion supply chain workers in several different countries. And the main role was to speak about this with the public, so hosting workshops or maybe trying to give out flyers, talk to anyone that's interested in this kind of notion. And so through their amazing website, they actually give anyone and everyone the tools, the pack to become a revolution activist, which I thought was incredible because it's very difficult to get involved with campaigns and protests if you don't have the tools, right? That's the usual excuse. It's like, oh, well, I don't have this, or I don't know how to start a campaign. They completely, as an NGO, cut that part out. They're like, if you want to sign, that's amazing. I'm going to send you a link. And in that link, you're going to click on it, and there's going to be a full activist package that gives you everything you need to understand how to approach this campaign or this policy. And so through educating their consumers, they create an amazing domino effect through their campaigning. So I am just a cog in the system of, I was really interested in the idea, and they sent over some of the tools that I could use to then become an activist. And I was very grateful for that because even though it was a relationship where both of them, I had to do some work, they had to do some work, of course. It wasn't just as easy as turning up and going to a workshop. But through their volunteering, it gives you the energy to do the same, right? And so I opened up my house to like the public at some point, and I said, look, bring anything that you want to have repaired, and let's repair it together. So through their activism, that sort of gave me the energy to connect with people that I don't know, and wanted to repair things that they didn't want to throw away, because Fashion Revolution gave me the tools to do that. So that's the power of having an open resource, and that's why it's so important also to take this perspective as a designer and also apply it to your product, because the more you give, the more you get back. This is really the truth when it comes to design philosophy. The more care, the more attention that you give to your consumer, the more you're going to get back and the more they want to get involved.
Thank you. This is very inspiring. Did you notice any changes after the spread of fashion revolution, both in the industry and the public awareness?
Yeah, massively. And I think what intrigued me the most from this experience was the quantity of people that actually sat down, architects, engineers, you know, amazing people that in their everyday life, they wouldn't even consider sitting down for 45 minutes and sewing a sock because it has a hole in it. Maybe because they don't have the time or the facilities. So again, fashion revolution gives you a tool. You give that tool to someone else. They use it, they spread it to someone else. So it's kind of, yeah, it has a huge, 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 I mean, first it's an incremental change, but then it becomes, mass depending on the amount of exposure that you have. And I was shocked for the response, honestly. I thought my friends wouldn't take it seriously, and they did, and they still do, after that experience and after many other experiences and workshops that I've heard of. It takes one for people to get involved, and then it's a domino effect, and they start to repair things because it's fashionable and it's cool and it's social, and we can have a chat while you repair your sock. That's so much cooler than going to Primark and not having a conversation with anyone, not learning anything, and then coming home and feeling guilty. So the behavioral aspect is big, and I think that the more this DIY and decentralized approach to buying or mending something, the more this is instilled in the public, the better. And a lot of people take it on. People like to do something new, and if you give them the opportunity, they will do it gladly.
This is interesting. So making a cultural aspect, making a moment of reunion to stay together and do something together for ourselves, for the planet, for the society. This reminds me of the famous quote: "We should all be feminists. We should also be all activists." Let's say.
Of course. I have this is how I live, actually. This is the way I eat. This is the way I build my friendships. This is the way I shop. There is a fantastic book by Jem Barton. It's called Don't Get a Job, Make a Job, which is really cool. And it talks about building your own propaganda, right? Like putting yourself in a new spot where you can learn how to be a team, where you can make tough calls, when you can swim against the tide, when everyone is doing one thing and you have to reinvent yourself again and again and again. And it's like, okay, if you don't like the selection that you have of jobs in front of you, of clothes in front of you, of people in front of you that are not influencing something positive, then you need to create something yourself. And making a job or creating an opportunity for yourself then opens up 1,000 more doors in that particular sector. So, positive change, keep on learning something new every day, and imagine best case scenarios, or as my best friend tells me, actually, to manifest as much as you can, whether that is through activism or through your own philosophy to cooking, to design. That is an essential way to be a creative, right? You shouldn't just have one job. You should have multiple jobs. I think that should be normal.
Well, what a powerful takeaway. So going back to the industry and the fashion industry in general, during the webinar that you hosted for STARS project, you explored the intersection of design innovation and climate change. What are the most pressing issues and innovation the industry must address?
Well, there are thousands of issues, climatically speaking, to to sort of to think about. I think that when you are starting out in this, it's really, really good that you go to websites like the IPCC, or perhaps a website that can give you the tools to understand what tools do you need to use, or what problems or what impacts are there in your current climate. Because if you start to think about it as the on a whole, it can be very frightening because there are so many issues. But I mean, we can't ignore all of them, but you can take on little and local ones. And so, for example, the the biggest problem that I was facing in Milan was the availability to the fabrics that I wanted. There weren't any. There weren't any fabrics that were out of the ordinary. They were very classic, luxury, expensive fabrics that, the everyday person can't afford. So then what you do is you sort of go into a new perspective of survival mode. You go into survival mode and you find what you can use, and you use what you have, and you have what you've got, and that's what you create with. And I think you can use the same approach when it comes to climate change. I mean, what is affecting you personally? Is it the air pollution? What is affecting you mentally? Is it the lack of nature, or just too much urban development? And look into your local area and be inspired by that. I believe that collaborating with people like Fashion Revolution or Greenpeace when it comes to making a product is fundamental, because as art always speaks for us, right? Fashion is, in my eyes, exactly the same. If you design a jacket with a problem that you have in mind, like you just hate the amount of air pollution that there is in your local area, you're like devastated by it, it's affecting your exercise, it's affecting your mood, then use the product to advocate for that mission. So maybe having a QR code printed on the label which links you to the organization or charity that is working within the air pollution field in your area. So creating links, connections to battle whatever problem that you want to face. Of course, you have huge displacements of citizens thanks to the amount of heat and the temperature that's rising, and you have glacial retreat and methane bubbles and flash flooding happening climatically we have huge issues to face. We need to be aware of them, but they don't need to drive every aspect of your design philosophy, because if you're a designer in Milan, you got to look around you and see, okay, what's affecting me on the everyday? How can I use my job to have a voice? And how can I instill something good in the product that can teach someone how to deal with the change that they are experiencing? There are many great examples of that in Milan, especially, for example, food banks or relating clothes to local charities. And building environments around the products.
Yeah, this is very on point and useful to remember. And what is your perspective on the current fashion system? Do you think it's evolving fast enough to address the challenges of sustainability, or are there significant barriers still holding it back?
I think design for sustainability has already made pioneering changes, and I think is going at the pace that it can go. I often think that sometimes the evolution is not really put in the limelight, or people don't actually understand how amazing, like how much the progress has been amazing, considering that, it was only in like the 1980s that really the environmental framework started to even be applied on a global scale. So if we look at it that, okay, it's over the last 30, 40 years that we've really been trying to innovate social technical systems, then I'm like, yeah, there's been an incredible amount of change and evolution, and I think that there's a very positive side to it. When it comes to the consumers, yeah, it will take a long time, I think, for them to harness sustainable behavior. But thankfully, we have SDGs and we have these sustainable development goals that should guide and pivot our design making decisions, which will lead to I hope, a more cleaner 2050. Maybe not 100% carbon neutral, but, right now we can't escape the fact that we have to make legal and political changes in the fashion supply chain. It's not just because we want to. I mean, legally we have to, and we have to make those conscious decisions that are becoming more and more likely in the workplace, talked about often. So yeah, I think there's a lot of positive change, and we will continue to see that. For example, the Next Generation EU has an incredible amount of funding that they are funneling into Europe to deal with these matters. So I think that we have not enough, but quite enough support financially to explore these matters and apply the right technology.
Yeah, there's a lot of change around us, and step by step we can move forward and make a greater impact. We are closing our interview. Just as a last question, now you are sustainable co-designer and researcher, so congratulations. But what does it mean, and what you expect from your job, your next project?
Yeah, it's very exciting. I'm very excited because actually I will be working within the investment field of Next Generation EU with the PNRR, which is in Italian is the Piano Nazione di Ripresa e Resilienza, and basically it's working just within the Lombardy territory to collaborate in defining lines of intervention, processes, and actions in the sustainable and circular design field, developing tools, a little bit like Lens Lab, as we were saying before, that enhance systemic co-creation between the community and the brands. So my job is basically to activate initiatives between the consumer and the brand to sort of create a more holistic harmony. And yeah, I actually start properly on Monday, so I still don't know exactly what my role will be in terms of what impacts maybe the team will have in the future, but the most important thing is that actually Next Generation EU they just hired, I think, like 1,000 researchers in Milan from the best universities of the world to try and face these issues on a local scale, completely local, not looking at a larger scale, but looking at what can we do with the urban development in Lombardy and how does it affect the community, and how can universities become hubs of research that work simultaneously with local brands to create a more circular approach to design. So yeah, I mean, I think being a fashion activist doesn't specifically exist as a job role yet, which is why education and university is kind of my playground, because I found over my career that I was never able to get a job in this particular field because they didn't have a sustainability department, or they didn't have a job that was in my niche, and I was really disappointed over the last 5 years because I was like, okay, I'm studying sustainability, I'm studying sustainable product systems, but when actually you finish university, you can't find a job that you studied for, that you spent maybe 8 years in the field. So I was very, very, very lucky to be recruited into this initiative, but this is the first time it's happening in Europe. So I'm, grateful to be a part of this new kind of job that is a multifaceted role. You're not one thing. It doesn't exist, but you are many. So I'm very excited. It's going to be a lot of research and participatory research, I suppose. But yeah, stay tuned. We'll keep in touch so I can tell you more about it in the next 6 months. I would love to share the progress with you.
Absolutely. I totally understand what you said about the difficulties in finding a job in sustainability, even if we are all talking about this right now. So yeah, congratulations for this new job, and we can't wait to hear more about you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much, Lily. Do you have any advice for aspiring sustainable designers, just to conclude with inspirations?
Oh, yeah, well, don't give up. Don't give up, because over the last 10 years, it's taken me 10 years to get my dream role. So, if you really want to pioneer in the design, like sustainable design field, then you need to open up and talk to every single person you know in different fields of sustainability, whether that's a scientist, whether that's an engineer, whether that is your professor, whether that is your friend. It doesn't matter. You have to build a network of people that have the same idea or philosophy in mind. I have to say that I wouldn't be in this role today if I hadn't have got out of my comfort zone and put myself in difficult situations. And also remember that if someone tells you that you can't do it, I mean, one, do it anyway. And two, it doesn't matter if you fail. If they tell you you're going to fail and then you fail, you're going to be better for the next time. So I would say just really have resilience and don't give up, because this is a tough field to find peace in. It's something that doesn't always give you satisfaction because of the current climate. But if you try to surround yourself with the right network, you definitely can go very far. So yeah, just trust and don't give up. That's it.
Perfect. Thank you, Lily, for your inspiring words and for your time, and hope to see you again very soon.
Yeah, lovely. See you soon. Thank you, Simona.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Green Fashion Dialogues. We hope you will find our discussion insightful and inspiring. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast and leave us a review. You can also follow the Stars Project on social media to stay updated on our latest initiatives and events. Remember, together we can make fashion more sustainable and inclusive. Until next time, I'm Simona Vettore, and this has been Green Fashion Dialogues.